When I was looking for a subject to document for my film class, I thought of my grandmother Nanny. Her name is Esther, but all her grandchildren and great-grandchildren call her Nanny. At the age of 81, she's got more energy than most anyone I know, young or old. I wanted to capture her verve and her unusual method of winning out over life by her enthusiasm and ever-present bounciness. It's difficult to get Nanny to sit down for more than a minute at a time, but fortunately for this film, I didn't require her to sit, but instead to make a dessert called a log roll.
Had a family recipe called a log roll. It's a very beautiful dessert that looks as though it took days to make. I experimented with the recipe and made it so many times it became Esther's instead of Dora's chocolate log roll. It is similar to a French Christmas log, but much less complicated. There is no buttercream or fancy mushrooms on top, but it's still a delectable comestible in my book. I will be happy to make it for you, and you can watch me while I'm at it. The log roll is a glorified sponge cake. It has no shortening whatsoever. It's mostly the yolks and whites of eggs with some powdered sugar, some cocoa, etc. So until we add the whipped cream and the chocolate icing, it's really a diet cake. I think you might be interested in a little bit of my background and how I became fascinated with cooking. I was born almost 82 years ago in the cradle of the Confederacy, Montgomery, Alabama, the fifth of 6 children. There were no automobiles then, but my family had a horse and carriage. We were comfortable middle-class folk. My mother had several servants, including Cookie, who reigned over our kitchen for 50 years. I married when I was quite young. I was 20. My husband, Joe, was 21. I remember my Negro mammy weeping at my wedding, saying, "Lord, Miss Esther ain't had her fling yet." Maybe she was right. After I married, we lived with my husband's parents for several years. My mother-in-law, whom I dearly loved, was not a good cook, and the food was not to my taste. I myself had never cooked because Cookie did not want her kitchen messed up by me or my 4 sisters. So in sheer desperation, I started clipping recipes and trying them out on my new family. Fortunately, my young husband was smart enough to praise all my culinary efforts, and he trained our 2 daughters to do the same. He used to say, "Who's the best cook on the hill?" And they would respond in unison, "Mother dear." Joe and I were happily married for 30 years. He died suddenly of a heart attack while working on his Ph.D. It was devastating to me because I had been Esther Gelders for longer than I had been Esther Frank. I was 50 years old and had never lived alone. When you take the cake out of the oven, you be sure that it's completely loose all the way around. Then you turn it out onto a floured and tea towel. In the late 50s, after I was widowed, I went to work as a cook at Kitty's, a small restaurant in Berkeley. I finally had a chance to try out the recipes I'd been amassing for years. One of the most asked for ones was the log roll. People bought whole ones, and we also sold it by the slice. I grew more proficient in making it. My husband used to say I could make it with one hand tied behind my back, and there was more truth than poetry in that. When the cake is cool enough to ice, you unroll it from the towel, slip the towel out from under it, right onto the board or platter. In 1958, I became a house mother in a cooperative dormitory on the Cal campus in Berkeley. They asked me to write a cookbook to benefit the building fund of the student co-op. It's called Recipes for Some Delectable Comestibles and includes the chocolate log roll. It was reprinted once and has been selling for over 20 years. When I was 60, I was planning a trip to Europe and decided to take a class to brush up on my French. In the class, I met my present husband, Stefan. He has a nice home in Berkeley where we've lived the 20 years of our married life. I now have 8 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. The log roll is always the birthday cake for all the children, grandchildren, and my many friends. When you get ready to put the icing on, be sure that it is of the right consistency. If it is too runny, it will not set well, and the marks made with the fork to simulate a log will not show up. Then it goes on the platter into the ice box for the icing to harden. C'est fini.
The log roll is a tradition in our family. But the much more important tradition is Nanny herself, her humor and her vitality, which I've come to enjoy and admire more and more.